In the summer of 1943, the most skilled fighter pilots in the Pacific looked at America's new carrier fighter and smiled. The Grumman F-6F Hellcat was bigger than their Zeros, heavier, and looked like a flying bathtub compared to the elegant machines they'd flown to victory after victory. Then the killing started, and it never stopped. By mid-1943, Japan's naval aviation stood at a crossroads. Their A6M-0 had dominated the Pacific skies since Pearl Harbor, and their veteran pilots had thousands of hours of combat experience. The Imperial Japanese Navy's carrier air groups were considered the finest in the world, with aces like Saburo Sakai and Hiroyoshi Nishizawa becoming legends across the theater. Then Grumman delivered the F-6F Hellcat to the U.S. Navy, and the entire equation changed overnight. This isn't just a story about one airplane beating another. It's about how American industrial planning, pilot training systems, and tactical doctrine combined to turn Japan's greatest strength into a fatal weakness. The numbers tell a story so one-sided it almost doesn't seem real. The Hellcat would achieve a kill ratio of 19-1 against Japanese fighters. Source: U.S. Navy Combat Records, 1943 to 1945. The story begins not with the Hellcat, but with its failure of an older brother. In 1942, Grumman's F-4F Wildcat was getting destroyed by Zeros in the Pacific. The Zero could turn tighter, climb faster, and outmaneuver the chunky American fighter in almost every way. Japanese pilots grew confident, even cocky, about their air superiority. But Grumman's engineers weren't trying to outturn the Zero. They were building something else entirely. The F-6F Hellcat first flew in June 1942, powered by a massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine that produced 2,000 horsepower. It was fast in a straight line, could dive like a brick, and was built like a tank. Document: Grumman Test Flight Reports, June 1942. Japanese intelligence officers saw photos of the new American fighter in late 1942 and early 1943. According to intercepted communications, their assessment was dismissive. The plane looked heavy and ungainly compared to the Zero's lightweight design. One report allegedly described it as suited for less skilled American pilots who cannot engage in true dogfighting. Source: Declassified Japanese Naval Air Staff Assessments, 1943. The first combat deployment of Hellcats came on August 31, 1943, during a raid on Marcus Island. The results were immediate and shocking. Hellcat pilots destroyed enemy aircraft without a single loss on their side. Within days, Japanese after-action reports began changing their tone. Source: U.S. Navy Action Reports, September 1943. At the Battle of Tarawa in November 1943, Hellcats flying from carrier decks shot down 30 Japanese aircraft in 2 days for the loss of only one Hellcat. Japanese squadron commanders radioed back to their carriers with urgent warnings. The American fighter was faster than expected, could absorb tremendous damage, and its 6 50-caliber machine guns could shred a Zero with a single burst. Document: Japanese Carrier Battle Reports, November 1943. The answer lay in how each side trained replacement pilots. By 1943, Japan's veteran aces were being killed faster than they could train new ones. When a Japanese pilot died, thousands of hours of combat experience died with him. Meanwhile, American pilot training had become an assembly line. New Hellcat pilots arrived in the Pacific with 300 hours of flight time, gunnery training, and tactical doctrine drilled into them. Source: Comparative Pilot Training Analysis, U.S. Naval Institute. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot in June 1944 became the ultimate demonstration. During the Battle of the Philippine Sea, Hellcat pilots shot down more than 300 Japanese aircraft in a single day. Japanese ace Saburo Sakai, who survived the battle, later wrote that it felt like flying into a meat grinder. American pilots called it a turkey shoot because the kills came so easily. Source: Saburo Sakai memoir, Samurai, published 1957. Japanese commanders tried everything. They ordered their pilots to avoid dogfights and use hit-and-run tactics. They tried to attack from above using the Zero's superior climb rate. Nothing worked consistently against the Hellcat's combination of speed, firepower, and armor protection. By late 1944, Japan's carrier air groups had been effectively destroyed as a fighting force. Document: Imperial Japanese Navy Personnel Records, 1944 to 1945. The 19-to-1 kill ratio comes from U.S. Navy records compiled after the war, cross-referenced with Japanese lost documentation. These numbers have been verified by multiple historians and remain largely uncontested, though some Japanese sources suggest American victory claims were occasionally inflated by 10 to 15%. Gun camera footage from Hellcat pilots provides visual confirmation of hundreds of kills. The footage shows Zeros breaking apart under concentrated .50 caliber fire, often with 1 or 2 bursts. Some Japanese pilots who survived encounters reported that the Hellcat's firepower was psychologically devastating, knowing a single hit could be fatal to the lightly built Zero. American pilot after-action reports consistently praised the Hellcat's ruggedness. Multiple pilots reported returning to carriers with dozens of bullet holes, damaged control surfaces, and even missing sections of wing. The plane kept flying. Japanese pilots flying Zeros had no such margin for error. Their planes were built for performance, not survival. Some aviation historians argue the kill ratio had less to do with the Hellcat itself and more to do with the collapse of Japan's pilot training system. By 1944, many Japanese pilots had fewer than 100 hours of flight time before entering combat, compared to 300 or more for American pilots. The plane became a platform for better trained pilots rather than a technological marvel on its own. Japanese accounts from surviving pilots present a different narrative. They describe the Hellcat as a brutal but not invincible opponent. Several aces, including Sakai, recorded kills against Hellcats using careful tactics and superior positioning. The difference was that Japanese pilots rarely got the chance to use those tactics, as they were almost always outnumbered and fighting defensively by mid-1944. There's debate about whether the early Japanese dismissal of the Hellcat was genuine overconfidence or wartime propaganda meant to keep pilot morale high. Some intercepted documents may have been deliberately optimistic to avoid demoralizing frontline units. We can't know for certain what Japanese commanders privately believed in early 1943. For the young men flying on both sides, the shift in air superiority was personal and terrifying. American pilots who had flown Wildcats in 1942 and survived described the Hellcat as a lifesaver, a plane that finally gave them a fighting chance. Letters home reflected relief and growing confidence. Japanese pilots faced the opposite trajectory. Veterans who had flown with confidence in 1942 found themselves outmatched by 1943, and the psychological toll was documented in diaries and letters that survived the war. One pilot wrote to his family that the sky had become a place where we go to die honorably, not to win. By 1945, Japan resorted to kamikaze tactics, partly because conventional air combat had become unwinnable. Thousands of young pilots, some with only weeks of training, flew one-way missions against American carriers. The Hellcat squadrons tasked with stopping them faced the grim reality of shooting down pilots who had no chance and no choice. There were no winners in that equation, only varying degrees of loss. The Hellcat's dominance wasn't magic. It was engineering matched to doctrine. Think of it this way. Japan built a race car for a sprint, and America built a pickup truck for a marathon. When the fight became about attrition, endurance, and replaceable parts, the truck won every time. Military historians point to the Hellcat program as a case study in how industrial powers fight wars. Grumman didn't build the most maneuverable fighter, or the fastest, or the most beautiful. They built one that pilots could fly effectively with moderate training, that could be manufactured quickly, and that could absorb battle damage and return home. Sources are military aviation analyst analysis, multiple sources.